Detachment need not be moralistic. You don't not do things because they're wrong to do. You don't do things because they're right to do. It's all about how we attune ourselves for our next phase. If we spend our entire lives tuning our own consciousness to the desires that can only be satisfied through this body, and this body goes away, then oh no, desire body gone, attunement incorrect for a different phase, a different way of existing. These subtler dimensions of life, the subtler enjoyments, the subtler understandings, they're what we attune ourselves to because they are sustainable in this body and in our astral body and in our emotional body too. The subtler understandings that we enjoy and the subtler enjoyments, they are conducive to no matter which body we have on right now. If we have on a material body and we're so identified with this particular husk, this particular mask, this particular form that surrounds our subtler forms, if we identify with that and tune our consciousness to that, then we'll be completely unprepared for any kind of other existence. And we'll have to return here. In the in-between part, our spirit will be very confused. We'll not really be sure what's going on or aware of the process of going from life to life at all or going into an afterlife. If we're so attuned to this world, we might literally just sleep for our astral birth before entering into this world again in a material birth, because we're just completely unprepared for it. The more beautiful parts of ourself, a deeper beauty. If we cherish that, then we will become who we truly are. We will work towards who we truly are, rather than who we only are for a time, or who we only are for a limited amount of births. And in each birth, we might identify with something else. So our spirit will go back and forth and not really make any progress. And tuning in consciousness and in whatever situation they might happen to be in. It's fun. It feels good to, drink and do drugs. I did plenty of that. I used to be an alcoholic and I used to be an addict. And during that time, many years of my life, I was just enjoying what I could, the highs that I could get through my senses, the pleasure I could get through my senses. Over time, my senses became more and more dulled. They became less sharp, and the experience of pleasure was duller and less sharp, and it took more and more to reach the same high, to feel the same feeling through my senses. And it got to a point where, I did as much as I could of a particular drug, and it should have been enough, but the feeling wasn't coming quick enough, and I couldn't physically do anymore. But the feeling, I still couldn't grasp it. I still couldn't feel it. And I began to panic mentally. My whole way of trying to enjoy things had kind of been ripped from under me because I couldn't physically do anymore, but I couldn't get to that feeling. And it woke me up a bit. It made me realize that not only were my senses becoming duller and duller, not only was my ability to experience pleasure becoming duller and duller, I couldn't count on these things to always reach bliss. to reach wholeness, to reach a higher version of myself. Drugs and alcohol, numbing is a big part of it, but we're also trying to reach a state of perfection and feeling through the senses. But that perfection is, not only can it not be reached, it isn't perfection. It's a far lesser perfection than spiritual experiences and the spiritual path. And alcohol and drugs create depression, anxiety, problems in your life, but depression and anxiety, and you end up treating that depression and anxiety with more of what's making you depressed and anxious. So it becomes a vicious cycle and a very self-destructive cycle. But I think human beings in general do that with various things. If it's not as extreme as a drug or alcohol problem, maybe food, maybe sex, maybe even ego. Maybe it's a subtler vice, ego, feeding your ego in various ways, or, vanity. Whatever it is, it can still be a subtler thing that we're trying to reach that state of perfection and experience that state of perfection. But we can't do it through the senses. We can't even do it through the subtler vices. We can only do it with a spiritual path that leads to oneness. Because as we expand, as the border of ourself goes further and further out, as we become bigger and bigger, there's no cap on that feeling. And not only does that feeling or that experience not have a cap, it's not self-destructive. It's ever expanding, and it is inherent in any spiritual path. To be honest, any truly spiritual path, one that doesn't have a cap, and one that makes us feel almost like the edges of ourself, what we understand about ourself, and the physical feeling edges of ourself are just expanding and not as concrete. And we redefine ourselves again and again and again by each level of expansion. And we become more and more, rather than isolating all of our experience down to a singular side of that many-sided gem of desire, many-sided gem of virtue as well. That many-sided gem of virtue, it doesn't confine like the gem of desire, and it doesn't dull. For a long time on the spiritual path, it's not gonna give you anything back, and it'll feel like poison at first because it's hard to practice various disciplines. It's hard to make yourself meditate. It's hard to control how much you eat. It's hard to control your sexual desires. And no need to get moralistic about any of it. Just sexual desire is also body identification, which you're tuning yourself to something that can't go with you and that changes, that you change out of. But when we come back to ourselves and who we are, there need not be these sheaths. It's hard to control even your breath during various spiritual practices, nyasa. It's hard to make yourself focus on studying a book, studying some kind of, whether it be the Upanishads, like I really enjoy, and various books on the Upanishads, or other kinds of scripture or other kinds of spiritual books. It's hard to make yourself sit down and learn these things, especially if you don't enjoy them at first. Over time, as you progress in your spiritual path, you'll start to enjoy studying. You'll start to enjoy meditation. You'll start to enjoy controlling even sexual desire, controlling how much you eat. And you'll start to sense subtler things than this gross world of appearances that seems so apparent to us throughout our lives before we start tuning ourselves to subtler things. But it's hard to control oneself in all these ways. And that's why it feels like poison at first. But over time, you'll start to enjoy it, and you'll start to reap the benefits of it. And every truly spiritual path is like that. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be Hindu. You don't have to worship the Divine Mother Kali. You don't have to follow any god. You can just follow yourself. There's a difference between following your true self, working towards your true self, and worshiping yourself. Because a lot of the time when people worship themselves, they're worshiping their ego, which is extremely confining, extremely limited, and extremely isolated to this one life. Egos don't transcend beyond this life. They don't really even come with you in the same form between lives and between the transition between this, the astral birth, and then back to the material realm. The ego is just born again and again and again. And usually when people worship themselves, they're worshiping a limited idea of themselves. They're not realizing their soul, their Atman. That's part of the grander reality that is the oneness of Brahman. That's why it's good to have a teacher. That's why it's also good to stay humble and not worship the form, like me worshiping the form that is Hunter and the name that is Hunter. Worshiping that would not be truly worshiping the deepest and truest self. You just get stuck in egoic philosophy, and it's self-empowering, yeah, but there's a deeper way to empower yourself, because there's a deeper self. It all comes back to expansion rather than isolation, and rather than dullness, sharpness, and clarity. And, you know, the gods, our teachers, spirits, they don't want us to do good things because they're good. It's because they want us to be free. And controlling oneself leads to freedom. Not being controlled by desire, not being controlled by the animal body, not being controlled by instinct, not being controlled by instant gratification, not being controlled by those things. And controlling them leads to freedom. And your spirits, your gods, or lack thereof, you yourself should want to be free. At any rate, thank you very much for watching. It's a bit of a rant video about detachment and attachment and desire and physical births. At any rate, I hope you found this interesting. If you did, hit that thumbs up down there. It really helps out the channel. Feel free to leave a comment. That also helps out the channel. Thank you very much, and hope all of you have a wonderful day.